Think about the times you let me go.
Hey everyone, welcome back! The video you're watching was supposed to start as a full meme build. Somehow, along the way, it became much more than that. Do remember that this is intended to be an off-meta setup and is not how I would normally recommend building Rhino, but it works. The setup today reaches 160 kpm, however, as a weapon platform build, it is thus highly reliant on your arsenal choices. So I would say this Rhino setup comfortably reaches at least 120 to 160 kpm on decent weapon choices. No, you don't need meta weapons, but don't come to me saying your Prisma Grinlock can't reach 120 kpm with this. Anyways, this Rhino has something special. Notice the HP bar. It's not gray. And if you look at the bottom right corner, well, that's not the Iron Skin icon, is it? Yep, today we made a health tank Rhino. Would I recommend running this for endurance? Generally, no, because running health tank for that is kinda dumb, but there is a caveat to the amount of actual EHP this build has I will explain later. Yes, it is technically possible to run this setup for endurance, but I would not recommend it. Okay, so why did I even make this Rhino? We all know about Iron Skin Rhino having issues on Steel Path, but that Ironclad Charge grants final multiplicative armor, and if you stack enough armor, you can get massive amounts of Iron Skin in the form of millions of Overguard. But there's an issue with this kind of setup. Falling off the map removes Iron Skin. Violence removes Iron Skin. And most importantly, you cannot restore your Iron Skin while it is already active if you are using the most common Rhino Iron Skin setup. Reinforcing Stomp resets your Iron Skin to 100% capacity of the current cast based off enemies you hit with your 4. On a zero helmet build, this works, but getting enough armor can pose a bit of a challenge, so most people's solution is to use Parasitic Armor. But this poses a new problem. You need Ironclad Charge to stack armor with your 1. You obviously need Iron Skin, and people want to keep Roar for the damage buff, so usually Rhino Stomp is the one to go. But that also means no Reinforcing Stomp, so you could give up Roar instead and run Reinforcing Stomp if you go meta weapons, and that's actually a solid choice in the current Rhino meta. However, what if you tank without Iron Skin instead? The biggest benefit about Ironclad Charge is the absurd final multiplicative armor it grants. The biggest weakness of Iron Skin is that once it is cast, the resulting final overguard value does not benefit from armor damage reduction or raw damage reduction like adaptation. In contrast, you do retain status immunity and a 0.5 seconds overguard gate when it breaks. So why did I get rid of Iron Skin? A Health Tank Rhino has two distinct differences. Health is affected by armor and raw damage reduction, improving the EHP of each point of health and thus the value of health orbs and heals massively, and that health is always healable without the use of an augment like Reinforcing Stomp. Now, there's one other advantage to keeping Rhino Stomp, and that is it affecting Eximus units even with Overguard and slows them to a crawl, which is a tool you give up normally if you subsume Parasitic Armor over as 4, or, well, losing Roar if over as 3. But I'm also not using Parasitic Armor today, at least on my Null Star build. Why is that? This is an active Rhino playstyle that is not for those that want to play very chill and ignore survivability. At the same time, this Rhino has absurd tank scaling. I am playing on Mott Void, the only tier 4 Void map, which has a very special modifier that many forget about. All enemies on this node always deal 3 times damage scaling separate from Steel Path modifiers. Except each hit on me is only removing single digit HP or barely over 10 even from melee units. Hopefully that is enough of a showcase on how much tank this build has. Parasitic Armor has one single weakness. It only grants armor. While you can get absurd armor scaling this way, which linearly scales into Overguard, Rhino already can get extremely high armor scaling without Parasitic Armor. More importantly, while armor scales linearly into Overguard for Iron Skin, armor does not scale linearly into damage reduction for health. Therefore, I chose the only other EHP helmet ability as another option today, Null Stars. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty on Null Star math today because it gets very complicated due to dynamic damage reduction values in combat. What is more important is to understand why I chose Null Star to start with. Rhino can easily reach 1200 armor with just Arcane Guardian from getting hit. Ironclad Charge can easily surpass plus 1000% final armor from hitting a bunch of enemies. That means 13,200 armor rating for Rhino. For health, this is already a 97.78% damage reduction. If I ran Parasitic Armor, I would have to slot Redirection and run, say, 300 strength. This would grant me another 3,330 armor on top of the 1,200 from earlier, but before Ironclad Charge. Ironclad Charge would now scale off 300% instead of 200% strength I used today, granting plus 1500% final armor. Now, with Charge, if I use Parasitic as well, I would have a 72,480 armor, or 99.59% damage reduction. What does this mean? Using Redirection with Parasitic Armor makes a 300 strength Rhino take only 0.41% damage overall on a health tank build. If I didn't use Redirection or Parasitic Armor at all, on a 200 strength Rhino, I still have 97.78% damage reduction, or take only 2.2% damage. So, Parasitic Armor makes me about 5 times tankier since I take 5 times less damage. 5 times less damage means Parasitic Armor is worth the same as a multiplicative 80% damage reduction being added to the build. However, this is all in the form of extra armor. If I eat a slash proc, all of that 72,480 armor is gone. Suddenly, your health gets one-shot because the only thing protecting you now is adaptation. What about Null Star? This one is quite simple. You get 5% final damage reduction per 16.7% duration on your build. Today's build at base has 254 duration, and you have the choice of spare Archon shard slots if you want to use duration shards to push it higher. Without duration shards, we have enough for 15 Null Star particles, which is only 75% multiplicative damage reduction. Whereas the 300 strength Rhino Ironclad Charge I explained earlier with Parasitic Armor grants an extra 80% damage reduction. So why would I use Null Star? Because 1, I said this was not recommended for endurance, but that on mod-based steel path I already proved at the start of the video I'm basically untouchable. 2, Null Stars is damage reduction for health, whereas Parasitic Armor is, well, armor. Slash ignores armor, but does not ignore Null Star's damage reduction. This means not even Slash can do anything against a Null Star health tank Rhino. And 3, unlike Parasitic Armor, Null Star can also function as a crowd control, stunning enemies that get a bit too close to you. However, this also means loss of particles and damage reduction, which is why we need to use the Neutron Star Augment to reset particles today. While Parasitic Armor had to slot Redirection, Null Star has to slot its own augment, making differences slot neutral. The final verdict of today's setup is to show that you can subsume both Iron Skin off for either Null Stars or Parasitic Armor, and have extremely high functioning health tank Rhino setups. Armor scaling alone with Parasitic Armor, Arcane Guardian, and Ironclad Charge on a 300 strength Rhino reaches roughly 99.59% damage reduction. Adaptation pushes this further to about 99.88% damage reduction. This is not enough for level 9k, which typically wants at least 99.97% damage reduction, but Parasitic Armor without Iron Skin is good enough into level several thousands. The Null Star setup at 200 strength already has 99.33% damage reduction from just Arcane Guardian, Ironclad Charge, and Adaptation. If you get 15 Null Star particles, you total at 99.83% damage reduction, just shy of the Parasitic Armor setup. At 10 Null Star particles, you total at 99.67%, and at 5 Null Star particles, you're still at 99.5%. Run as many duration shards as you want, you need at least 300 duration to hit 18 particles for the 90% cap from Null Star. Higher than this produces even more particles, above 18, but still only provides 90% damage reduction. And instead, these extra particles function as scapegoats you can afford to lose while still retaining 90% DR from the ability. Perhaps the most important part of today's theorycraft is that a 200 strength Rhino with just Ironclad Charge, reaching plus 1000% final bonus armor with the Adaptation and Arcane Guardian, already has 99.33% damage reduction without even using a helmet to start with, and leaves you free to do whatever you want at base steel path. But enough theory, let's look at that Rhino build. The setup today actually has 224 strength with growing power not 200, but I kept it simple for numbers earlier. If you hit 9 enemies on this build, you will have roughly plus 1000% final armor from Ironclad Charge. But how are you supposed to hit 9 enemies with a single charge with just 64% range? That's why you saw me using a Nautilus with Cordon Manifold spam. More importantly, I had to slot Augur Reach because at 34%, you literally have too small of a hitbox to hit 9 enemies even if they're directly touching a crowd. 64% range restores our charge hitbox to 1.28 meters wide, so we can actually hit enemies properly. The reason why I still want negative range is that you lose Null Star particles when enemies get too close to you. Thus, dumping range lowers the seek radius of Null Stars and means they are less likely to fly off. Neutron Star lets you uncast and recast as needed to reset stacks. If you're using Parasitic Armor instead, then you would run Redirection over Neutron Star, and swap Narrow-Minded for Transient Fortitude. Also, swap Augur Reach for Augur Message. The Null Star build has 25 seconds duration on Ironclad Charge before you have to use it again to reset your armor, whereas the Parasitic Armor setup only has a 15.2 seconds duration but has 100 range. Do you note that even the 64% range version with Null Star can still make good use of Stomp to freeze Eximus units and Acolytes, because it has a 25 meter default range and at 64% is still a 16 meter radius with a 97.5% slow. The other weakness of getting rid of Iron Skin is that now you need to slot Prime Sure-Footed since you no longer have status immunity. However, it is much easier to just constantly restore health than restore Iron Skin unless you give up Roar. Weapons like Paris or Fierce Incarnon with the Wind Purity Augment or Visage Bal have heals. Nikonas have the Daikyu Augment, and enemies also just drop health orbs to start with. Remember how all this damage reduction makes each single point of health worth so much more effective hit points. This frees up your reliance on Iron Skin, which can get you killed if you forget to recast, whereas Parasitic and Null Stars have their own duration even if Ironclad Charge wears off. Arcane Blessing is used to make the most of each hit point, increasing HP max to 1570, whereas Arcane Guardian grants plus 900 flat armor as part of the scaling into Ironclad Charges calculations. I used a Torrid Incarnon today with this build, which is a big reason why I was able to hit 160 kpm, since Nautilus was also spamming Cordon to drag things into range. I used these perks on my Torrid. Now, the important part is that I'm using a Viral Heat Hunter Munitions Torrid. I want to stress this is not a normal Torrid build. The reason why it's built like this is because Manifold Bond only triggers on enemies killed with at least 3 unique status effects on them. Do keep this in mind so that whatever weapon you bring on Rhino as your DPS can reliably inflict at least 3 status effects. The more you kill, the more often Cordon can be spammed, which also goes through walls and will drag enemies to you for kill again. This is why I'm willing to lowball the KPM of this Rhino with Nautilus to at least 120 KPM. I don't really care what you bring for the rest of your arsenal in general. I've said that you just want a strong weapon to inflict at least 3 status effects when DPSing. You may want to bring a dedicated weapon to kill Acolytes, but do whatever you want. I wanted to try out an A-grade build to kill them with this build, since projectile AoEs are buggy against Acolytes and do extra damage, but yeah, use whatever is comfortable. Alternatively, I did also bring a Zal with Rending Crane Exodia Hunt, because the neutral combo consists entirely of slam attacks to pull enemies in from proccing Exodia Hunt. This shouldn't be needed, but is a viable alternative if you do not have access to a Nautilus for Cordon spam for grouping enemies together to set up Ironclad Charge to hit a crowd. All you need if you use a Za is attack speed, and your focus school is mostly irrelevant, but if you don't bring Madurai, I would likely recommend considering casting speed shards. Uneru is a good choice if you don't have Prime Sure-Footed, because it gives you 40 seconds complete status immunity on transference. The Nautilus build is pretty straightforward. Remember, mod hierarchy matters, so we want the most important precepts on the top row and towards the left. Reinforced Bond and Tenacious Bond are both optional in this Rhino setup. Reinforce is only for proccing reload shields from holsters tech to keep your Sentinel alive and not the plus 60% fire rate. Tenacious Bond can proc if you use Volclock with Point Strike or a laser rifle with crit chance Riven. You really just need Nautilus for Cordon spam with Manifold tech, and Guardian is universal but unnoticeable, since we're running a 99% damage reduction health tank setup today. Vacuum and Primed Regen are self-explanatory. How to use? Simple. Cast Null Stars or Parasitic Armor. Kill enemies. When Nautilus groups them, get close and charge through them for Ironclad Charge to give crazy armor scaling. That's it. Keep killing with your weapons of choice. Whenever Parasitic Armor expires, recast it. Whenever Null Star drops too low in particles, double cast to reset it. Bring a good gun and just kill everything around you that you can. Remember to cast Roar for big damage. And if you need, remember, Stomp is available to slow Eximus units and Acolytes. Cheers. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with the Dagath update and companion rework. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. Don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching and see you all next time.